I built things my whole life. Cabinets, porches, a marriage that lasted 31 years until cancer took my wife, Carol, on a Tuesday morning in October. After that, I built a life for 2 children who were not mine by birth but mine in every way that mattered. My name is Harold. I am 67 years old. I live on 4 acres outside of Cookeville, Tennessee, in a house I framed with my own hands when I was 32. I want you to understand who I am before I tell you what happened to me, because what happened to me will make you question whether justice in this country is real or just a word people say when they need comfort. My son, Marcus, was always the one who took the easy road. His sister became a nurse. Marcus became good at excuses. He had charm, though. Lord, did he have charm? He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd been waiting for him. Carol used to say Marcus could sell sand in the Sahara. She meant it as a compliment. I was never so sure. When Marcus was 28, he showed up at my door on a Friday evening with 2 children I had met only a handful of times. Lily was 7. Owen was 2.5, still in pull-ups, still calling everyone Da because he hadn't sorted out names yet. Marcus had a duffel bag over one shoulder, and the look of a man who had already made a decision and just needed someone else to absorb the consequences. He said he needed me to watch them for the weekend. He said he had a situation with a job opportunity up in Nashville that required his full attention. He said it like he was asking me to water a plant. I looked at Lily. She had Carol's eyes, which gutted me completely. She was holding her little brother's hand and looking at the floor. I said fine. I said he could leave them through Sunday. He set the duffel bag down inside my front door. He kissed the top of Lily's head. He told Owen to be good for Grandpa. Then he walked back to his truck and drove away. Sunday came and went. I called his cell phone 14 times between Sunday evening and the following Wednesday. The first 3 calls rang through. After that, it went straight to voicemail. I called his sister. Let's not her numb. I think that he in a nader. She hadn't heard from him. I called 2 of his friends whose numbers I still had from years ago. One didn't answer. The other said Marcus had mentioned something about heading out west, but he didn't know more than that. I drove to Marcus's apartment in Sparta that Thursday. The landlord was already there with a cleaning crew. Marcus had broken his lease, left owing 2 months' rent. The landlord asked if I was there to settle up. I told him no and drove home. I sat at my kitchen table that night, with Lily asleep on the couch and Owen in the portable crib I'd borrowed from my neighbor Earl, and I tried to think clearly. I was 60 years old. I was retired. I had a pension from 30 years in the trades and Carol's life insurance, which I had barely touched because spending it felt wrong somehow. Like closing a door I wasn't ready to close. Owen woke up crying at 2 in the morning. I picked him up and walked the kitchen floor with him the way I used to do with Marcus when he was small. By the time Owen settled, something in me had settled too. Not acceptance exactly. More like recognition. These were my grandchildren. Whatever Marcus had done or failed to do, that fact was not going to change. I enrolled Lily in the elementary school in Cookeville the following week. I met with her teacher and explained the situation plainly. I told the school counselor the same thing. I took Owen to the pediatrician and had his records transferred. I documented everything from the beginning. Because even then, somewhere in the back of my mind, I understood that a man in my position needed to be careful. An older man raising his son's children. No paperwork, no court order. I knew how that could look to the wrong set of eyes. Earl helped me file for emergency kinship guardianship through the county. Earl was 71, a retired postal worker who had lived on the property next to mine for 23 years. He drove me to the courthouse 3 different times because I hate driving in town, and he knew it. The judge granted temporary guardianship within 6 weeks. I got it made permanent the following year. The years moved the way years do when you are busy. Lily started middle school and discovered she was good at math. Owen grew out of his pull-ups, and then grew out of his shyness, and then grew into the kind of boy who brought frogs inside the house and expected you to be impressed. I fixed up the back bedroom with bunk beds. I built a treehouse in the big oak out back because Lily asked for one, and I had the lumber and the time. I coached Owen's Little League team for 2 seasons, until my knee made that impossible. My daughter called every Sunday. She offered to take the kids more than once. I told her we were fine. I thought about Marcus sometimes. I won't pretend otherwise. I thought about him when Lily won the county math competition, and there was no father in the bleachers. I thought about him when Owen got the stomach flu at age 5 and cried for his daddy in that specific way. Children cry when they want the one person who isn't there. I thought about him on Christmas mornings and on report card days, and on the afternoon Lily came home from 7th grade with tears on her face because a girl at school had said something cruel about not having a real parent. I never once tried to find him. That was my rule with myself. If he wanted to come back, he knew where I lived. Same house, same road, same 4 acres. I wasn't going anywhere. He came back when Lily was 15 and Owen was 10. I was in the yard splitting wood when Earl called over from the fence line and said there was a car coming up my drive he didn't recognize. I looked up and saw a silver sedan moving slow. It parked near the porch. A man got out from the driver's side and a woman got out from the passenger side. It took me a moment to place him. 8 years does real work on a person. Marcus had put on weight in the middle and lost it in the face somehow, which gave him an odd, hollowed look. He was dressed too well for a Tuesday afternoon. The woman with him was younger than him by a decade or so. Sharp features, dark blazer, carrying a leather folio under her arm. Marcus raised his hand at me like we'd seen each other last month. I set down the splitting maul. He said, "Hey, Dad." I said nothing. He introduced the woman as Shannon. He said she was his partner. He said they had driven up from Atlanta. He said he'd been thinking a lot, and he wanted to talk. I told him to talk. He said he missed his kids. He said he'd made mistakes. He said he was in a better place now, stable, financially secure, had a house, had a life. And he thought it was time for Lily and Owen to come home with him where they belonged. I stood there with wood chips on my boots and looked at my son. This man I had changed diapers for and taught to throw a baseball and bailed out of 2 different jams before he turned 25, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. I said the children were in school. I said they had a home. I said he had abandoned them without a word for 8 years, and he was not taking them anywhere. Shannon opened the leather folio. She handed me a document. She said they had retained legal counsel and were prepared to file for custody. She said, further, that they had reason to believe the children were being held against their will by someone who had no legal right to them. She used the phrase, unlawful retention of minors. She said it the way people say things they have practiced. I told them both to get off my property. They left. But 3 days later, 2 sheriff's deputies came to my door. I want to tell you that I handled that moment with dignity. I want to tell you I stayed calm and explained the situation, and everything was sorted out quickly. That is not what happened. What happened is that I stood in my own doorway while one deputy read from a complaint that described me as having taken 2 children from their father 8 years ago and refused to return them. The complaint used the word abduction. It named me specifically. It had Marcus's signature on it. The deputy said they needed to take me in for questioning. Lily was at school. Owen was at school. I called Earl from the back of the patrol car and asked him to pick up the kids and keep them at his place until I figured out what was happening. Earl said he would handle it. His voice was steady. He was always steady. I was held for 11 hours. I told them about the guardianship. I told them to check the county records. The deputy who interviewed me was not unkind, but he said the complaint had been filed in a different jurisdiction and the records hadn't been pulled yet, and they needed to follow procedure. They called the school. The school confirmed the children were enrolled and had been for 8 years. They called the pediatrician's office. The pediatrician's office confirmed ongoing care since Owen was 2. They called the county family court office and confirmed the guardianship order. They let me go at 8 in the evening. Earl was waiting in the parking lot with his truck running. He didn't say anything when I got in. He drove me home. When we got there, he made coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table while Lily and Owen slept down the hall, and Earl said, This isn't over. He was right. Marcus and Shannon had apparently anticipated that the criminal route would fail quickly. What they did next was slower and more careful. They hired an actual family law attorney, a man named Greer, who had an office in Cookville and a reputation Earl described as the kind of man who wins arguments he has no business winning. They filed a formal petition to dissolve the guardianship on the grounds that it had been obtained under false pretenses. They claimed Marcus had never abandoned the children voluntarily. They claimed he had left them temporarily with me, following a mental health crisis, and had been in contact with me throughout. They claimed I had deliberately severed that contact and used the resulting gap to establish legal control over his children. All of it was a lie. Every sentence of it. But lies in a courtroom have the same weight as truth, initially. They both just sit there on paper, waiting for someone to sort them out. Shannon, it turned out, was not just Marcus's partner. She had a background in real estate law and understood how to build a paper case. They had located 2 former neighbors of mine, people who had moved away 5 or 6 years ago, and these 2 individuals submitted written statements saying they remembered seeing Marcus visit the property regularly over the fauna. Years. I had not seen either of those people in at least 4 years. I had no idea what Marcus had offered them or told them. My court-appointed attorney was a decent man named Pat, who was handling 11 cases at once. He was honest with me. He said the guardianship was solid, but the petition had enough in it to require a hearing. And at a hearing, credibility mattered as much as documentation. Lily came to me the night before the preliminary hearing. She was 15, and she had her grandmother's eyes, and she stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed the way teenagers do when they are trying to seem older than they feel. She said, "Grandpa, I need to tell you something." I said, "Sit down." She sat. She told me that 3 weeks earlier, before Marcus had even come to the property, she had gotten a message on Instagram from an account she didn't recognize. The account had sent her a single message. "Your dad wants to reconnect. He's going to make things right. You should come to Atlanta." She had not responded. She had blocked the account, but she had screenshotted the message, because Lily has always been smarter than the situation requires. I asked her if she had told anyone. She said she had told Owen. Then she said, "I also have something else." She pulled up her phone. She showed me a video. She had recorded it herself, 2 weeks ago, from her bedroom window. In it, you could see Shannon standing in my driveway, talking on a cell phone, clearly not knowing she was being filmed. The audio was poor, but you could hear fragments. You could hear Shannon say the phrase before the hearing, and he won't have anything to counter with. You could hear her laugh. I looked at my granddaughter. I said, "When did you start thinking like a lawyer?" She said, "When somebody threatened my family. I called Earl at 10 that night. I told him what Lily had shown me." Earl was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "He had something too, and I needed to hear it." Earl told me that 6 days after Marcus first showed up at my property, he had been approached in the parking lot of the grocery store in town by a man who said he worked for an attorney. The man had asked Earl if he would be willing to provide a statement about my living situation with the children, and whether he had ever observed anything that caused him concern. Earl said the man had implied that being cooperative could be mutually beneficial. Earl had told the man exactly where he could put his mutual benefit and driven home. But Earl had also written down the man's license plate. He had a piece of paper in his kitchen junk drawer with the number on it. He had written it down the same day because, as he said, "I've known you 30 years. Harold." I knew somebody was going to try something. That plate came back registered to the law firm of Greer and Associates. They had tried to approach my witness before there was even an official case. They had tried to shape the testimony before the complaint was formally filed. That is not legal gray area. That is witness tampering. Pat, my attorney, went very still when I showed him everything the next morning. He said, "This changes things considerably." The hearing was held on a Wednesday. The courtroom was small, and the judge was a woman named McAllister, who had the look of someone who had seen every version of every story and was not easily impressed. Marcus and Shannon sat at the plaintiff's table. Shannon had dressed Marcus in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Greer sat beside them with a yellow legal pad and an expression of professional confidence. Pat presented the guardianship records. He presented the school enrollment history. 8 years of it. He presented the pediatric records, the dental records, the Little League registration, the county fair entry form Lily had filled out when she was 12 and won second place in the baking competition. He presented a letter from Lily's school counselor and a letter from her math teacher and a letter from Owen's pediatrician, all of whom had interacted with me regularly for years and described an engaged, attentive guardian. Then Pat presented the screenshot of the Instagram message sent to Lily before Marcus had even appeared on my property. He presented Earl's written account of the parking lot approach. He presented the license plate record. Judge McAllister looked at the plate record for a long time. Then she looked at Greer. Greer said the approach had been informal and exploratory and was in no way connected to the filed complaint. Judge McAllister said that an approach made 6 days before a complaint was formally filed, using a vehicle registered to the law firm that subsequently filed that complaint, strained the definition of coincidental. She called a recess. During the recess, Pat told me to sit still and not say anything to anyone. I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench, and Earl sat next to me. Both of us in our good clothes. 2 old men waiting for a system to do what it was supposed to do. Marcus walked past me in the hallway. He stopped. He looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't quite guilt. It wasn't quite anger. It was something smaller and sadder than either of those things. He said, "I really did mean to come back, Dad." I looked at my son for a long moment. I said, "Owen used to cry for you at night when he was 5. Lily failed her first semester of 6th grade because she couldn't concentrate. She didn't tell me why for 2 years. You have missed every single thing that mattered." He didn't say anything else. He walked back toward the courtroom. When we reconvened, Judge McAllister spoke for 12 minutes. I am not going to try to capture everything she said, because I was sitting there, trying to remember to breathe. What she concluded was this: the guardianship had been established lawfully, maintained responsibly, and was clearly in the best interest of both children. The petition to dissolve it was denied. The evidence of pre-litigation contact with a potential witness had been referred to the state bar for review of Greer's conduct. Marcus's claim that he had maintained contact throughout was contradicted by every documented record in the file and was not credible. She said one more thing. She said that in her 22 years on the bench, she had seen parents abandon children in every conceivable way, and she had seen grandparents step into those gaps at great personal cost, and she wanted the record to reflect that what I had done for 8 years was not a crime. It was, in her word, devotion. I sat there in that small courtroom, and I could not speak for a full minute. Pat drove me home. Earl followed in his truck. We sat on my porch that afternoon, the 3 of us. And Earl brought a bottle of bourbon he'd been saving for what he called a moment that earns it. And we drank a glass each and watched the light go off the fields. Lily got home from school at 3:30. She came up the porch steps and saw the bourbon and the 2 old men and said, "So, it went okay?" I said, "It went okay." She sat on the porch railing, and Owen came tearing out the front door behind her with his shoes on the wrong feet because he'd put them on himself in a hurry. And he launched himself at Earl, who caught him with a grunt and pretended to stagger under the weight, and Owen thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. I looked at Earl over Owen's head. Earl gave me a small nod. Later that evening, after the kids were inside doing homework, I told Earl I wanted to do something for him. I told him I didn't know exactly how to put a number on what he had done, but I wanted to try. He had driven me to the courthouse 3 times over the years. He had picked up my grandchildren from school when I was taken in for questioning. He had kept a license plate number on a piece of paper in his junk drawer for 6 days without telling me, on the instinct that it might someday matter. It had mattered completely. Earl told me he didn't want money. I told him that wasn't what I was offering. I'd been sitting on a piece of timber at the back of my property for 6 years, a nice flat half-acre with a creek view, and I'd had it surveyed 2 years ago with the vague idea of building something. I told Earl I was going to sign that parcel over to him so he could put a small cabin on it if he ever wanted to stop renting that place in town where his daughter lived and have something of his own. Earl looked at the fields for a while. He said, "Harold, you don't have to do that." I said, "I know. I don't." He said, "All right then." Marcus did not fight the ruling. I don't know whether that was Shannon's legal advice or something that remained of his own conscience. I heard through my daughter, 6 months later, that Marcus and Shannon had separated. I heard, a year after that Marcus had moved to Albuquerque. I don't know what he does there, or whether he thinks about Lily and Owen. I have no particular feeling about it either way. My feelings on the subject of Marcus exhausted themselves a long time ago. What I have instead is this. Owen, who is 11 now, has decided he wants to be an engineer. He explains his reasoning in great detail at the dinner table and then gets distracted and starts talking about whatever frog or beetle he found that afternoon. Lily is applying to 3 universities next fall. She wants to study mathematics. She has been accepted to a summer program already. She told me about it on the phone while I was in the hardware store, and I had to walk to the back of the aisle and stand there for a minute before I could answer. Earl broke ground on his cabin last spring. I helped him frame the walls. My knee complained about it for 2 weeks, and I did not care at all. His daughter came down from Nashville to see the progress, and she said, standing in the middle of what would be Earl's living room, that she had never seen her father look so settled. There is a thing people say when they talk about situations like mine. They say, "You did what anyone would do." I have learned to smile when people say this, because arguing with kindness is pointless. But I want to be clear. Not anyone would do it. I have met enough people in 67 years to know that. Some people would have called the county. Some would have looked for Marcus. Some would have waited to see if he came back in a week. Most people would have done something other than walk into a school office on a Monday morning with a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old and say, simply, "These are my grandchildren, and they need to be enrolled." I did not do it because I was noble. I did it because Lily looked up at me the first morning and asked if they were staying, and something in her voice made the question sound like it had been waiting a long time to be asked, and I could not make her wait any longer for an answer. I told her, "Yes, we're staying." That was 8 years ago. It is still true today.